Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I hope I'm audible. So let's start with the presentation today. Hello, my name is Pranshu. I'm lead AI engineer at Mathco. Today, I'll be talking about how do we make LLMs perform better by infusing organizational context in it. So let me start with a example. Let me take with a scenario. What we have seen so far in the latest advancements that have happened with GenAI is that a lot of business users have been now equipped with a lot of AI assistants that they use on a daily basis, either to generate insights from their data or to get more and more out of their data. Let's take a typical example where a global sales manager of a company is trying to ask the same AI assistant that, generate the quarterly review performance report for me. And now what this AI assistant does is a generic AI system would just go scrape the data, try to understand like what are the key metrics that I should offer, what are the kind of generic insights that I should offer. But what it fails really at is not being able to understand what user needs are. So it cannot really understand what exactly how should I make this report more specific to a particular business user. Contrast to that, let's say we choose a context-aware AI, where the same assistant now generates a report which is much more tailored to your needs. It is aligned with the goals of your organizations. It is aligned with your persona, where you see that the product filters, the region filters are all applied as per you. Now, you don't have to go back and hassle with that report more, because all you have to do is sit on top of that report and make some strategic decisions. Now, in these scenarios, definitely the second scenario would make the business user a lot more happier and more satisfied. That's the gap that I want to address in my today's presentation, that how can we infuse this organizational context and make the AI systems a bit more better. So let's get started. Let's first understand, so far, when we, in the last 1 year, how our experience has been at Mathco is when we have exposed these AI assistants to a lot of business users, we saw a diverse challenges that we were facing when they utilized these AI assistants. So let me take an example. The first question here says that what are monthly volume sales for ISEX? Now, a typical LLM, they can perform only to a certain extent because of the knowledge that they carry. But can it understand that ISEX is the brand that you're looking for? Can it understand what exactly means by volume sales? Because in the data, it does not know ISEX is a brand or ISEX is a manufacturer, ISEX is a product, or it could be that the data that you have created might not have volume sales exactly as a column in your data. Now, in this particular case, the lack of metadata usually leads to generation of inaccurate queries, or sometimes even it fails to execute the query because the column is missing. Now, similarly, in the second example, we are talking about what is ACV distribution. Now, these are some typical examples, real-life examples that we have seen our business users are asking on the platform. So in this particular case, as we've understood that LLMs have their own understanding of certain metrics and KPI, they might come up with their own formula in order to execute that particular question. So let's say they might assume that this is how it needs to be calculated, but until you provide the exact definition, it won't be able to calculate the question correctly. So that basically stems the need of the domain metrics or the domain KPIs that are required for an LLM. One very interesting example that we have seen is a lot of business users ask questions like, what are sales for my brand? How does LLM know who you are? Now, so in that particular case, LLMs does not have a typical understanding of which regions you operate in, which products you are handling, what kind of categories you are handling. It does not have any idea. It gives you a very generic answer, or it might prompt you that what brand are you talking about. So in this particular case, most importantly, what we are missing is the user persona that we have provided to the LLM. It's completely missing. So these were a typical broad of challenges which helped us understand that to a certain extent we can provide LLMs to the business users, but in order to make the answers more reliable, in order to make the answers more accurate, relevant, you need a lot of organizational context to make them work. So this brings us to a question then, with these diverse challenges, how do I know what kind of context is right fit for me? There could be broad variety of context because the use cases with GenAI are like immense. So today I want to cover a few broad categories that so far in the last couple of years, experimenting with a lot of business users, we have identified at a very diverse, with very diverse nature of users. So I want to highlight some of the very few important ones that we have seen. The first, that is the most commonly used and the most important one, is the metadata. Now, everybody here might have seen applications like text-to-SQL or doing a conversational analysis on top of your structured or unstructured data. Sometimes your columns, sometimes your tables are so curated by from a developer mindset that the column names or the specifications of those tables are completely vague. In that particular case, what is required is a very well-defined data dictionary that can help LLMs understand what are my databases, what are the table descriptions, column values, and so on. So that metadata can actually enrich how LLMs would actually process that question a little better. Similarly, we'll move to the next, which is domain knowledge. Now, let me take an example where, as Mathco, we work with a lot of different kind of clients across domains. And what we have learned so far is that not two CPG companies or not two retail companies work exactly the same way. A same metric, which is, let's say, a market value share or an ACV distribution, might be interpreted a bit differently for one organization versus a different organization. So how do we handle that? In that particular case, we would want to be able to create very well-defined KPIs, and that can be onboarded onto the system, and with their right usage, with their right calculation methodology. So that basically comprises of some of these organizational contexts. The third one, which is the org persona, which I just defined, that when the questions are asked like my brand or show me sales for my region, this is where the org persona and the user persona comes in. Interestingly, we have also seen a lot of organizations have started connecting their org tables to the LLMs, because in the org tables, it is very clearly defined what are the roles and responsibilities of a certain business user, or what are the goals of that business user. So that really helps LLM understand, okay, which is the business user I'm trying to talk to, and then can I curate the insights only specific to that business user. So that's basically the org and user persona. Another interesting aspect that we have seen is sometimes in the conversation history, we might have given a lot of information to the LLM. For example, this is how I want you to calculate this metric. Or let's say, here is my brand that I'm focusing on. Now, do you want to keep answering that question again and again? No. So we can leverage the conversation history itself as the context so that the LLMs can maintain what you were talking about or how your interaction has been so far, so that your future interactions with the LLM can be influenced using that conversation. Similarly, there are many more such applications and many more challenges which are requiring the need of identifying more and more such type of context. An interesting one which recently we found out was the business users asked question like, optimize the spends for this particular channel. Now, in this particular case, LLMs don't have the right access to, let's say, your models, which your data scientist team might have built, or some sort of simulators which your team might have built. So those intelligent assets which you might have curated also needs to be provided to the LLM as some of the tools. So we have one such tool that we had created recently, which was automating dashboards and automating PPT generations. Now, for example, if I ask questions like, analyze the data from the last 3 years and then create a summary for me. Now, in that case, it can analyze the data very well, but it cannot translate into a PPT because there is no such intelligent asset available to the LLM to convert that into a storyboard. So intelligent assets can also become part of your context that can help LLMs generate more and more reliable answers. One of the recent use cases that we have seen is we are moving towards autonomous agents now. So in autonomous agents, usually you want to move away from a paradigm of doing a Q&A to a completely opposite paradigm of letting the agents interfere with your system autonomously. What do I mean by that? Let's say if my agents are monitoring a warehouse through a camera feed. Now, suppose in that they saw that there is a hazardous activity that has taken place. Now, analyzing that feed real time, they would not want to wait for a business user and come and say that there is a hazardous activity that has happened. So this autonomous agent can just directly look at that video, analyze it, and then maybe send the information about this event to a different route planning agent, which can say that the associates can start taking a different route in the warehouse because this place has become hazardous now. Now, in this particular paradigm, what we did was we completely moved away from the human in the loop and let the agents interact directly with the environment back, so that these autonomous agents can go back and do something more. And that's the last type of it, which is the real-time data, where we want to connect LLMs maybe to a web search tool, to a live camera feed, to a data feed, or so on. So now, since the variety challenges are quite a lot, context types quite a lot, how do we go about handling such variety? How do we go about processing such variety of information? So let's go into that. Now, typically, when you thought of building a context-aware LLM or a context-aware system, how we have strategized right now is we have come up with a 4-step framework that is helping us completely take care of this challenge end-to-end. So the first step in this framework is the context onboarding layer. Then the second layer is the engineering aspect of it, and third is the improvement aspect of it. Let's start with the onboarding element of it. Now, enterprises can have your data present in any form, anywhere. They might have some documents present in Confluence. They might have some documents present on SharePoint. They have some documents present on Colibra. It could be spread across anywhere. You need a clear onboarding layer, which can have a lot of data connectors that can just bring that enterprise data into your system. And then you can use those connectors to be able to standardize or even enrich some of the data which they already have. So you would want to bring all of that and curate that at a common place so that you can retrieve it later. The other aspect which we have seen is helping quite a lot while onboarding is not everybody knows as a business user what context should I upload, right? Because you might not know, is this the right information that I should give to the LLM? Is this the right way to give the LLM? Is this the right format? In that particular case, what we have done is, since we have a lot of SMEs who have worked with CPG, who have worked with retailers, what we have seen there is, we have created some base SME templates that can help you get a good acceleration start towards your context journey. So we'll have some of those KPIs already curated for you. We'll have some of those metrics and definitions already curated for you that make sense from your domain perspective. And on top of that, the business users or the organizations can customize and add their own to the same template. That helps them solve at least 60% of their first level requirements of context. Now, all of this, once we've done, we have onboarded, we have got those data to us, we are ready to pre-process it. So let's move to the second stage of it, which is engineering aspect of it. Now, in this engineering aspect, how do we need to understand this is basically two major angles. One, is the user have started interacting with the system? So before the user have started interacting with the system and after the user has started interacting with the system. So the first is the pre-processing element of it. So whatever data that you have onboarded and gathered in the first step, you would now want to pre-process it. So there are typically two challenges that happens here. The first challenge is, since the data has so much of variety, how do I process? I can't have one fit strategy that can be applied to all the data sources. I might have to process my KPI separately. I might have to process my metadata separately. I might have to connect to org persona a bit differently. So I can have dynamic processing strategies so that, let's say, if I want to keep data in a structured PostgreSQL, maybe I want to keep my dictionary stored in a vector DB. Or maybe if there is a very complex database, I might want to pre-process and create a knowledge graph for it so that there are interconnections maintained in it. So in that pre-processing step, you can have your own variety of strategies. And the good part is that till here, the user is not yet interacting with your system. So to afford some latency, you can have your pre-processing as complicated as possible because the user has not yet come to the system. Now, in the second stage, where we are talking about retrieval, this is the place where user journey starts. So now, let's say the user has come, and the user is trying to ask a particular question. At that point of time, you need to dynamically retrieve the right set of context from all the context that you had kept ready for your retrieval. So in that particular case, what you would do is, first, how typically we start is, we first try to build an intent classifier where whether that particular question is actually something that we can handle or not. Is that something that ideally I should process or not? Or we might just say this is something out of the data, I might not be able to handle it. Once your intent classifier says that, yes, this is the right question that I want to handle, in that, you can maybe start processing it with an ambiguity resolver. So this is another form of taking more context with the user. So let's say if the user has asked a more complex question, where LLM cannot understand this completely, it might nudge the user and ask for a more clarification. So this clarification becomes part of your conversation history, which can go back as the part of the context, which we just discussed as the interaction history. Now, this is the place where your question or your query is ready for your retrieval. Now, in this particular case, what we do is, we do some sort of semantic searches to be able to identify, let's say, if in my question, there is the brand i6. How do I go and find it back in the vector DB that I had created? I might do some semantic search on top of it. I might create a graph query to be able to pick all the relevant nodes around it, and then use that to enrich the question that has been asked by the user. So that way, you can retrieve that particular context during runtime, and here, there is always a trade-off between how much of processing you want to do at runtime, so that your latency for the user doesn't get impacted. You might have like different strategy in order to handle that latency. You might stream the response for the user so that user is continuously engaged with how your LLM is functioning. You can also give a lot of steps. For example, now LLM is doing this, now LLM is processing your data, it is picking up from DB, so that user is continuously aware of what is happening in the system. And then once it is retrieved, then your question can be answered much more reliably. One of the challenges that we saw in this journey is sometimes when the very first time we built this context layer, what we saw was every time for every question, irrespective of how complex or simple it was doing a context retrieval. But is that something good? Might not be like applicable to all the scenarios. Because in some cases, the question could be so simple that you don't want to spend this extra time in retrieving that context, and then you can have some threshold-based scenarios where, you know what, if just tell the LLM that if the context is not high confident context, is it below certain threshold, don't use it. Because the more information that you provide to your LLM starts getting more and more confused, or sometimes it might just, instead of solving the right question, it might make more assumptions and then solve it a bit more inappropriately. Or in your query, it might add more filters, which was not required. So you can have these threshold-based techniques that you can apply. Similarly, there are some ways in which you can make it a little bit faster, because latency versus accuracy is the biggest trade-off that we have been asked from variety of our clients. So either you use threshold-based techniques, or you might want to use some caching-based techniques so that you can improve the overall responsiveness for the user. And once all of this is done, in the end, you have an enrichment module that basically takes your context, takes your question, takes your data, and then completely packages it and generates a much more reliable answer. So this is the place where the entire engineering of the context happens. Now, what happens after the context or the response have been generated? The last step of this framework is basically the improvement aspect of it. So there are multiple ways in which you might, this is a common question that people start thinking that, what if the context that was retrieved by the LLM is wrong? It can happen. In a real scenario, sometimes it happens that the definition that it might have picked could be a wrong definition. Or sometimes it could have picked the same definition from multiple documents. How does it know that which definition do I need to use? In those cases, what we have enabled is a simple feedback mechanism for the user. So user can actually provide feedback on either they can go and edit the context themselves, or they can start disliking the responses, and you can use those feedback mechanisms to go back in your processing layer, so that next time you know that this was the kind of context which was rejected by the user, and I don't want to use it again because it might be inaccurate. Or you can actually raise an IT ticket and say that, hello admin, please go and update this context for me. I think the definition of this metric is wrong. There are multiple ways to handle some of this feedback mechanism. And then all your post-query refinements happen once your system starts improving and again and again. So if I have to sum it up, the overall process starts from making sure that you support enterprises onboarding as much as data as possible. You create seamless layer of onboarding that data. And the second is you allow them to process it very efficiently. You keep as much as context ready for your retrieval, and so that the user does not have to manage the latency. The third is you smartly retrieve it at the time of query processing, which is quite important. And then the last is you do not miss out on any loose ends. You ensure that the loop is completed, and you take the feedback back into the system. So this is one of the typical entire strategy that we have followed in order to improve all the applications that we have been building for our customers. And we have seen a significant difference in the way the LLMs were responding before versus now with these context-aware LLMs. And with over the period of time, the more and more conversation that you have with your assistants, the more and more interactions that you have, you can keep improving this context further and further. So this is a typical architecture that I want to just quickly help you visualize the 4 steps that we just saw. How does it actually process it if I have to visualize it? The first step starts with creating that customizable interface. So our generative AI platform, Ask Nucleus, basically it's completely standalone platform. It's an independent platform that can go and sit on top of any of your web stacks, which is completely customizable as per your need. And this allows users to onboard as much as variety of context that we discussed. It allows those connectors to be able to seamlessly integrate with your enterprises and then onboard that system. And then it also provides the interface to actually go and ask the questions. So you can have your own personalized assistant on top of it. So we have both the personas there. Now, once the question comes from the user, the brain which is depicted here is the typical orchestrator that we are talking about. First, it takes the question. It does all of those steps which we just discussed in the engineering aspect of it, where it first tries to understand the context that we had onboarded, what kind of context I need to fetch from my context layer. And then we have a skill set marketplace. Skill sets is basically an analogy to all the agents that you build. So your agents could be a text-to-SQL agent. Your agent could be a storyboard generator. Your agent could be something like document retrieval. It could be anything. You can have as many as custom agents that you would have built. So based on the context, based on the question, the brain would now try to pick what is the tool required, or might create a sequence of multiple tools, which we usually call as planning, that it will create those tools in a sequence, process this information, and generate the response on the right side. So one of the interesting questions that we had got from one of our clients was that, how do I trust that the response that I'm seeing on my screen, is it right or not? That's when we started building a citation feature. So what citation feature does is, if you are doing a retrieval from your structured data, it actually tells you this is the exact query that was created in order to perform the retrieval on your structured database. Not only that, it also gives you the context that was fetched in that particular processing, so that the user is aware whether the right definition of certain metrics was used, whether the right filters were applied or not, whether the right query was generated or not. So in this particular process, with citations, it adds more and more transparency to the business user, and also gives them provision to give us the right feedback so that we can go back and improve the system. So this is how the overall typical architecture of a simple question processing looks at. This is the behind of Ask Nucleus that I've been talking about. Now, I want to make it a bit more real. So far, we've been talking a bit more conceptually. Let me take a real example that we saw, and how does it actually improves. On the right side, what you see is a prompt template that I have taken from a very renowned paper, Chess, which basically talks about how do you harness context for text-to-SQL applications. So here, the example that I'm talking about is how do you make your context-aware text-to-SQL. Text-to-SQL, for a larger audience here, is from a natural language question, how do you go back and structure, how do you go back and query a structured data? So from text, you are actually generating a query. Now, in this particular prompt template, we have left some of those places open for us to fill in the dynamic retrieval process. So let's say the question says, what is the PCPI for my restaurants. Now here, can anybody understand what kind of two anomalies that might come? The first one that you can see here is the definition of PCPI, because LLMs don't have literally a clear definition of PCPI, or they might hallucinate, or they might just assume that this is what PCPI could mean, and it completely be out of my domain context. Secondly, my restaurants. Again, it does not know what does my mean in this particular case. So what we do here is, the first thing that we do is we provide the schema so that it knows in what horizon of data it needs to look the answer for, and it can actually go and narrow down to the right tables or the right data set. So until here, your data is not at all exposed to the LLM. You have provided a simple schema of the database. The second step, which we talked about, was the context retrieval. So we go and fetch the metadata, which is the descriptions of your tables, descriptions of your column, sample values of your column, and we pass that so that it understands what columns needs to be used to process that particular question. The second is the metrics and KPI. So here, the exact definition of PCPI metric will be retrieved from your metrics and KPI document, which was onboarded in the first layer, because there would be multiple KPIs that were defined there, and LLM can pick the definition of PCPI from there and then send it in the part of the context piece in the prompt. The third is the user persona. So once we have connected the LLM or your AI assistant to your org table or your chatbot, in that particular case, it will pick the designation and the description from there, and overall it will enrich the entire query, and then generate the final response, which has the right set of filters applied, which has the right set of the definitions utilized. All right. So that's more about the entire the context-aware LLMs that I want to talk about. Here are two snapshots that I wanted to show you from the platform, which is the Ask Nucleus and the Nucleus platform that we have. So the first one is the onboard context layer that we had built, where we provide a lot of data connectors that the enterprises can use and just onboard that data with us. And we allow them to see how it is getting processed. And on the right side, what you see is the chat assistant of it. So here we have kept both the personas in mind. The one is the admin or the IT who's setting up these assistants for all the business users in the organization, because they have the right access to data, they have the right access to documents, and usually in a real scenario, business users don't typically have a clear understanding of the right data that they want to use. So the right side is the persona for a business user, where they can just come and ask more questions, accelerate their insight generation process. And that's where we are showing, I have run the same question, which is what is the PCPI for my restaurants? And it shows the SQL query generated as the citation, and also shows the context which was generated. So this basically increases the transparency in the UI as well. So I hope that session was useful. That was the overall session where I want to talk about how do we build context-aware LLMs. And thank you all for attending this session. I hope you liked it.